Great to be catching up with South Australia's Primary Industries Minister, Clare Scriven. How are you going there, Clare?
Oh, not too bad, thanks, Ricky. How are you?
All right, thanks. You've attended the ministerial meeting on Wednesday where the New South Wales Ag Minister, Dougal Saunders, took this proposal about sheep electronic tagging. We might get into that later, but basically the major point of concern is foot and mouth disease. A little bit about varroa mite as well, but foot and mouth is front of mind for everyone.
Yes, that's right. And so biosecurity, of course, was a top agenda issue, an item for the meeting last week. And I'm told that there hadn't actually been an agricultural ministers meeting for around about 9 months, which I think is unfortunate, but there were certainly some strong views in the room that we should have them very regularly. And that's very positive because we were able to talk about what was happening with foot and mouth disease and what each of the states are doing, as well as, more importantly, of course, what the federal government is doing, given that it is very much a border issue, particularly with Indonesia.
Yeah, and that's sort of, we've tried to find some positives out of this situation regarding biosecurity, and certainly the first one is that there is no cases at this point in time within Australia's livestock herds of foot and mouth disease, something important when you look at some of the coverage going around at the moment.
Well, that's a really, really good point, Ricky. Australia is foot and mouth disease free. There have not been any outbreaks, and I think there has been some unfortunate coverage which people need to realise actually will have an impact on our trading relationships with other countries. If there's a sense that, actually there's been incursions in Australia when there has not, that's damaging for all of our industry and all of our producers. So that's, as you say, item one is that we are foot and mouth disease free. And also, of course, the threat of foot and mouth disease and indeed other diseases it has been ongoing. That's something that we're always aware of, and both federal governments and state governments, as well as peak bodies in livestock industries, have been working on preparedness constantly as an ongoing issue. Now, because there is an outbreak in Indonesia, and particularly in Bali, that is an increased threat, an increased concern. But it's a threat that we've been aware of. There are more than 20 countries around the world that have foot and mouth disease, including many in Asia and in Africa. So it's not as though this is something new and out of the blue. This is something that governments have been preparing for. But I am very glad to see, the ramping up of some of those things, including the announcement recently by the federal government of an extra $14 million to address foot and mouth disease. And what I think was really important about that is that, yes, it was to improve and increase biosecurity measures here in Australia, but it was also about helping Indonesia to eradicate their outbreak. So it included providing vaccines in Indonesia, as well as increased scientific and technical advice. Both very important things as well.
And I guess if we were to try and find a silver lining of what we've had to go through with regard to COVID-19 and human biosecurity, is it's given Australians an appreciation of how multifaceted those sorts of approaches need to be with state and federal and international liaison to keep on top of things.
Yes, that's right. It really does have to be, jointly collaborating and jointly coordinating our responses to these issues. And that's something that I think is certainly happening here in Australia. The federal government, as well as all of the state and territory jurisdictions, we're all talking about what we can do. There's, of course, the National AusVet plan, which is in place for responding to an outbreak if it did occur. And I think each of the states, certainly South Australia, is continuing and increasing its work in terms of preparedness. A couple of the things that we've got coming up is some workshops. So PERS is working with Livestock SA, the SA Dairy Farmers Association and Pork SA to have an emergency animal disease workshop in, I think it's next week, the 4th of August. And that'll be industry leaders working together with PIRSA at what the updated Industry Preparedness Action Plan will be, which addresses what happens in that immediate first 2 to 3 days. The bigger response, of course, has already been there, and all sorts of things are agreed already under the AusVet plan, including, in case your listeners are interested, funding. So there are in-place funding agreements so that if an outbreak did occur in one state, that the costs to eradicate that and address that are shared throughout jurisdictions, which is really important, I think, because even if there was a single outbreak in one state, that actually affects nationally all of us. So it's an important thing to note that we are working collaboratively together with the other jurisdictions, as well as, of course, with industry.
And that has to be reassuring, I think, that to see state states are willing to work together with the federal government on that front. But are we seeing an erosion of the bipartisanship we saw during COVID-19 when it comes to, we're all in it together and putting the response at the front and centre when we've got federal parliament resumed and Mr Dutton saying we're leaving the border open to Indonesia is like a loaded gun? Are we seeing a difference in approach here with animal biosecurity than we have, say, with human biosecurity?
Well, that's certainly something that a number of people have pointed out, and I think it's really disappointing if these sorts of matters are politicised. Farmers are really anxious at the moment. What they need from their governments and from their leaders is support and a well-reasoned and logical approach to a threat, which, as we know, has been there for many, many years. The work's been ongoing to prepare for a potential outbreak. And I think industry is really keen that we have, strong partnerships. It's not helpful to anyone to have wild allegations or to have simplistic answers which don't necessarily address the problem. I think it's very important to note that the industry has not been calling for a travel ban with Indonesia. That's not something that they see as positive and productive. What I'm advised is that the only time that would be considered is if the approaches that are in Indonesia, if they were not considered to be managing the outbreak. Now, at this stage, they are managing that outbreak. And so I think we need to be listening to the producers who, after all, their livelihoods are at stake in terms of what they're calling for, and they're not calling for that. So I would really hope that we don't have the politicisation of biosecurity, because that is in no one's interests, and in fact it's quite damaging. Similarly, the coverage that you referred to, some of the media coverage, we need to understand that those sorts of messages will be seen by our trading partners around the world. So if they get the impression that actually Australia is not free any longer from foot and mouth disease, which is not the case, but if they get that impression, then that's going to have a very negative impact on our trading relationships, which again is not going to help the industry nor help our producers.
No, well, I noticed looking at the Agriculture Department federally, their list of foot and mouth disease free countries, there's only something in the region of 45 to 50 of them, and China's not one of them, and they're our major trading partners. So if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander if you have a border restriction, and then that opens up all those concerns you're talking about.
Yeah, well, I think that's a good point. How many borders would we close if we closed if we stopped travel between all countries that have mouth disease within them? We would certainly be limiting travel to a great degree. And I think that's the important thing to realise. There's over 20 countries that do have foot and mouth disease within them, and Indonesia just happens to be the most recent one that has had the outbreak. But I think it's very important and very worthwhile that we're working with Indonesia to help them eradicate the outbreak, as well, of course, as all of the things that we've done here in Australia and in South Australia, things such as enhancing surveillance at airports, introducing the sanitation mats. We've got enhanced surveillance in terms of both airports, but also things coming through the mail. Farms, of course, are increasing their biosecurity practices. And here in South Australia, we're also increasing the diagnostic testing capability at Vet Lab, which, of course, is the State Animal Health Diagnostic Lab. So all of those things are really important. And it is about working collaboratively and not trying to politicise. It's not useful to anyone.
Now, just closing on where we started, that was the Agriculture Ministers' meeting on Wednesday, the first one that would have been chaired by new Federal Minister Murray Watt. You don't have to give too much away what was actually said in the meeting, but how did he go handling that first meeting?
Look, of course, it was my first meeting as well. It was an online meeting, and I think there was a lot of very positive thoughts and contributions. I think most states and territories were very glad that there was an admins meeting happening. They used to be quite regular, but apparently have not been for some time. And I think there's a real value to those. I certainly found it worthwhile to be able to interact with my interstate counterparts, as well as the new federal minister, and to see where they're at, not just with biosecurity, but with some of the other issues that are front of mind. And there's going to be another meeting in a couple of weeks' time, as well as a face-to-face meeting that will be organised within a couple of months.
Well, Clare Scriven, Primary Industries Minister for South Australia, thanks so much for joining us today. A busy time for an Agriculture Minister.
Yes, it is. Thanks very much.